Hi, I'm Michael Muntz, a filmmaker from Perth. For more than a decade, I've been following the case of Scott Ostick, who was convicted of murdering Noongar woman Stacey Thorne in 2007. After 12 and a half years in prison, Scott Ostick was acquitted in a retrial which focused on sensational revelations of planted evidence. The consequences of Stacey's death were devastating for both families, and the mystery of who killed her remains unanswered. And a warning to Indigenous viewers: tonight's program contains images of someone who's died.
Boddington is a small town, around about 2,000 people in it, 120 kilometres south of Perth.
Beautiful town with a river running through it, nice and green hills during winter, very close-knit, very community-minded. Everybody knew everybody.
35-year-old Stacey Thorne was found murdered outside a neighbour's house on Sunday night. She was more than 3 months pregnant.
It did change everybody's life, and a lot of people in town all took their own sides. They divided a town.
The whole town was just devastated. It just broke this little town apart.
It was a brutal murder. Stacey was stabbed 21 times and what seems to be quite a frenzied attack.
We couldn't believe that someone could do that to you, and especially being pregnant, stabbed 21 times is unbelievable.
A man jailed for more than a decade for murdering his pregnant girlfriend, found not guilty.
I would rate this case, Scott Ostick, as one of the most extraordinary cases I've ever been involved in. 12 people in that jury in 2 hours and 15 minutes found him unanimously not guilty in circumstances where the whole case was fought on the basis of a corrupt investigation.
I've had to spend 12 and a half years in prison for something I didn't do. The Thorne family, they believed that I was the one. Now they probably still do, but a jury thinks the other way and believes that it wasn't me. So in the end, there are no winners because there is still nobody convicted of Stacey's murder.
This is my baby sister's house, Stacey. This is where she was murdered. I've only been in there once since it all happened. I just can't go back in there. It's just too hard.
Scott Ostick was acquitted of Stacey Thorne's murder, but it's always going to be a bitter taste for the Thorne family.
And we've got a beautiful rock here with a plaque on it.
They are now left with a situation where the killer of their loved one remains at large, hasn't been brought to justice, and there's no closure for that family, and that in itself is tragic.
It's almost like it's all been swept under the carpet now, hidden, put in a box that's, too hard, basically. So nobody's looking at it. Nobody's asking, well, what really happened? Nobody's asking, is there anybody out there that actually knows anything that might be able to assist us here? It's like they've just shelved it.
Haley. Oh, good, how are you?
Being a private investigator, I'm determined to actually get the family a result. It's not fair what you've been through, it's not fair what she went through either.
Yeah, I know. We just can't understand how it got to this stage. We want to know what happened that night. There's people out there who know what happened, and we want them to just come forward and tell me what happened to my baby sister.
This is my son, Kerry, and my daughter with Stacey. My memories of Stacey is growing up like in a small country town, and we was really close family. This one here is my brother, Stacey, and me. What I loved the most about Stacey was her personality and her laugh. Stacey was an easygoing person, She loved what she was doing.
She was an Aboriginal relation officer at the school, mainly working with the Aboriginal children and working with the white kids as well. She was a teacher's aide. Stacey was honest. She was very respectable.
My dad is very quiet, very private, isn't really that outgoing, just a simple man.
Scott was 15 when he finished school. He worked at the bauxite mine, had been there for about 13 years. Scott would have his 2 girls when it fitted in with his shift work at the mine.
I did have a great life before. I had everything, had a job. I had my house, I had 2 young daughters, I had a great life to look forward to, and then all of a sudden gets taken away.
That Sunday, we had a barbecue down at the river. It was a hot day too. Stacey said she was going home to watch the news and have an early night. So that's the last time I seen her. I just wish that I'd turned back time. We should have went home with her.
On the 9th of December, I'd woken up mid-morning and had a few household chores to do, and my flatmate and I ended up cleaning the pool, had a couple of beers.
It was a quiet Sunday afternoon. Went for a bit of a swim because it was a pretty warm day. And then Scotty went down the pub for a couple of drinks.
I had a few bourbons, been there for a couple of hours, and then they refused me service. They thought I'd maybe drank 1 too many.
He wasn't being aggressive or being rude, but he was intoxicated to the point where he was refused service at just after 7 o'clock that night.
After I left the pub, I went to Stacey's place. I had known Stacey like my entire life. We had always been close with the Thorne family. Stacey's brother was the same age as me, and her other brother was the same age as my brother. So we spent quite a bit of time together. And it was just a night after the pub had closed, and there was a few people, had a bit of a party and that. And things had grown from there between us.
I think it was about a year after he broke up with the mother of his children that he started to see Stacey. I think Stacey and Scott was a casual relationship.
I'd been seeing Stacey for about 18 months. She was a wonderful person, very smart, beautiful person to be with. Once, twice a week, we'd call each other. Like she would call me or I'd give her a call. And we'd spend a few hours together, just at her place or even at my place a couple of times.
She was very quiet about it, but we knew what was going on. We knew.
Not so much quiet, it was more private.
Oh, private, yeah.
She didn't like her business out there.
Yeah.
What's her business is her business.
Stacey Thorne's family knew about her relationship with Scott. They only found out in the latter stages about Stacey being pregnant with his child.
She was looking forward to having a baby. She wanted to be a mother. She was always a mother to Hayley's children, and she wanted one of her own. She was happy. She was starting to grab things like the cot and clothes.
She doesn't talk to us about him, but she did talk about the baby.
On the 9th of December, that night, I went to her place just like I did any other night I went there. We had a chat for a little bit, and then we had sex, and then had a little chat again, and then I'd gone home.
So when Scotty came home later on in the evening, I was just watching a movie. He'd obviously been at the pub for a while, so he'd had a few drinks, and yeah, he was quite happy at the time. After the movie, myself and Scott went out and just had a chat outside before I took off to bed.
I never heard him knock on my front door. Mum and Dad and my brother. I can hear him coming down the passageway, singing out my name. Hayley, singing out, Stacey's dead. She's dead, somebody killed her. But I was just shocked, I didn't know. I couldn't say anything.
Losing your sister, baby sister of all people, and your best friend, my neighbour, it's just unbelievable. I just laid on the couch and cried because I know I'm never going to see her again.
One of my housemates came in and woke me up and said, some detectives outside want to talk to you. And I said, what the hell do they want? When the police told me that Stacey had been murdered, I wasn't sure if it was real to start off with. I know, like, it took a few seconds to go through my head. And yeah, that was just such a shock. I couldn't understand why or how someone would do something like that.
When police spoke to Scott initially and they told him that Stacey had just been killed, one of their comments was that he never showed much emotion.
Yeah, when I found out that Stacey had been murdered, yeah, I was upset in my own personal way. And yeah, it was devastating news for me, for her family, for the entire community.
The police were convinced in their own mind that Scott Ostick was the killer, he being the last person that was in the presence of Stacey Thorne that night. Scott Ostick had admitted sleeping with her that night before he returned home.
The police quickly focused on Scott as a suspect because the victim, Stacey, was carrying his baby, and some days before he'd sent her a phone message saying, "Please, Stacey, I'd do anything for you not to have the baby."
That was just a text message that was not, like, harsh or anything like that. I was just telling her my point of view.
Scott Ostick was taken to the police station and questioned, and fingernail scrapings and so forth taken from him, obviously for the purpose of seeing whether he was the murderer. Very naive in saying he didn't want a lawyer, but his approach was, I'm not guilty of anything, so I don't need a lawyer.
At about 9 o'clock, the police said that they had cordoned his house off, but he was still only helping them with their investigations.
The next thing is that the police thought that they had caught Scott lying. They asked him which clothes he was wearing the night before. The police showed Scott CCTV vision from the hotel, which showed that he was wearing clothes different to the ones he told them he was wearing. Then later, when police found remnants of burnt clothing in the stove at Ostick's house, they assumed they were clothes that Ostick had burnt, the clothes that he'd worn the night of the murder.
That was their allegation, that I'd just burnt blood-soaked clothes in there.
So we went into the police station and Scott sat there, he was crying, just distraught. And he was there until about 8 o'clock that night till we picked him up.
On the 11th of December, just 2 days after the murder, police found the first piece of crucial evidence, the Jim Beam can. It had Scott Ostick's DNA and fingerprints on the can, and that Jim Beam can was on the road verge about 20 metres north of Stacey's letterbox. On the 12th of December, detectives found the alleged murder weapon. It was found to contain Stacey's blood on that knife.
They alleged that after Scott Ostick had stabbed Stacey Thorne with that knife, he then ran across the paddock towards his home and must have dropped or discarded that particular knife.
On the 14th of December, detectives found a packet of Winfield blue cigarettes at Scott's house that had Stacey's blood on it.
According to the police, after murdering Stacey Thorne, Scott returned to his house, lit up a cigarette and thereby put some of Stacey's blood onto the cigarette packet.
Ultimately, Scott Ostick was charged with the murder of Stacey Thorne, I think about 7 days later. So it was a miraculous completion of a murder investigation in a really, really short period of time.
She's my sister. She's my best friend. I live right next door to her. I wasn't home that night. I was away for the weekend.
Peel detectives and Major Crime Squad officers arrested Mr Ostick, a local mine worker, early this morning.
When they told me they arrested me, I said, well, you're making a mistake. I always believe that people who get arrested are probably the person who's done it. But after having gone through it, it's clearly not the case.
Scott Douglas Ostick was bundled into the back of a secure police van this afternoon.
We was all out in front of the police station, waiting for them to bring him out.
You're nothing but a child, baby!
And they had all the police out around the paddy wagon while they went past us. If we would have got close to him, we might have done something to him, but you can't get close to him when they had all the police to protect him.
After being denied bail and spending 2 years in remand, Scott's case finally went to court, and the prosecution case was a very strong one.
The prosecution case was that Scott Ostick came home after he'd had sex with Stacey. He waited until his 2 colleagues in the house had gone to bed. He then took a can of Jim Beam and Coke by way of Dutch courage, was their argument, to the location where ultimately he stabbed her to death.
That's what the police believed. I'd gone back to kill her to prevent her from having a child. Yeah, there's no way in the world that happened.
On the state's case, after killing Stacey, Scott has left her house and then he has walked to his house via a paddock which connected the properties. Now, that paddock wasn't lit, and it was suggested by the state that he did that to avoid detection.
On the prosecution case, after returning home, having brutally killed Stacey Thorne, he left his cigarettes on a table on the back porch. No doubt he had blood on his hands because there was blood on the cigarette pack, which was her blood.
The state's case was that once he got home, he then went about trying to destroy any evidence that may implicate him in the crime, such as having a shower and cleaning his thongs and then burning his clothing that he was wearing that night.
Scott Ostick maintained his innocence, but the jury obviously didn't believe him.
Today, Scott Ostick, the father of Stacey Thorne's unborn daughter, was sentenced to life with a 25-year minimum for willful murder.
You have not at any time shown even a twinge of regret for what happened to Stacey Thorne. Although you denied any involvement in the death of Stacey Thorne, in the end there was an overwhelming circumstantial case which clearly established that you were the person who had wielded the knife.
I have no criticism on the jury at the first trial convicting Scott of this crime. The case, as it was presented to that jury, appeared overwhelming.
I remember the night when the jury come back in and when they said guilty, just a relief. You know, we got our justice. Who murdered Stacey? He was in jail. And we thought that was finished. It was over.
Members of Ms Thorne's family are satisfied with the sentence, but angered by Ostick's attitude.
We're ashamed of him. We hate him. I hope to God he rots in hell.
When the sentence was read out, just every piece of my body just shook. I never ever thought that he would have been found guilty of it. So many things just didn't add up.
I'll never give up to the day I die, because I know he sits there at prison and he says to me, "Mum, I never done it," and I believe him.
I could never imagine Scott harming anybody, let alone murdering somebody. Scott had been caught for drink driving and whatever. He wasn't as what you would say, a perfect angel, but, you know, was never violent and stuff like that at all.
So my nan never gave up at all throughout this entire time, which is just amazing to me. Like, Dad said he didn't do it and she refused to, you know, believe that he did, and she spent all of her money on lawyers and, you know, she made people aware of the situation.
But there's a number of people in this room who've inspired me to make a difference where we can. That's what Justice WA is all about.
There was a new organisation starting up called Justice WA. Something just told me that I need to go.
I happened to be seated at a table, and call it dumb luck or fate. Also at my table was Scott Ostick's mother, Robin. My initial reaction was, yeah, okay, it's a mother who's pleading her son's innocent, and I've heard that before. And I don't know, it was just something about Robin, I suppose, when I first spoke to her. The best way to describe Robin is she's just a typical loving mother, a country type, seemed very genuine and down to earth.
Then he rang me and said, I'll look at your son's case, and he got me to go and pick up all the boxes of files from the previous lawyers.
I said, I wasn't a gun for hire. I said, I'll look at this forensically and I'll give you my honest opinion. Right, so this is a map of Boddington. I agreed to take up this case and do it pro bono, primarily because I knew that the family didn't have much money, having just gone through a murder trial.
Clint Hampson's probably one of the best credentialed individuals I've ever met. He has a medical degree, he has a doctorate in forensic science, specialising in DNA and blood analysis. He somehow found time to get a law degree, and he started his working life as a policeman for the WA Police Force.
So after I received the files from Robin, within a couple of months I identified some concerns with this case.
What he did was he retrieved every single photograph that had been taken by the forensic team that had gone through that house over 2 days before the homicide squad detectives took over the crime scene.
I was aware that in 2007, when this crime was committed, police had just recently changed from regular photography to digital photography, so all the photographs came with time and date stamps, which gave us an idea of when each of those photographs were taken. The first thing that stood out to me was the cigarette packet.
The cigarette packet with the victim's blood on it. It was the most crucial evidence that led to Scott's conviction at his first trial.
Clint Hampson discovered, when he went through both the search video and all of the metadata referable to each one of the photographs taken by the forensic experts of each exhibit in situ, is that the cigarette pack was not on that table.
This meant after the forensic team had been to the house and inspected it all and left, someone later had come along and placed a cigarette packet on the table at the back of the house.
I was extremely shocked, and that immediately put me on alert as to what else might have been going on in this particular case.
What I've done, Robin, is I've prepared a PowerPoint.
I wanted someone else to have a look at that and see if they agreed with me, so I went to Robin Napper.
Slide number 1, there we go.
He was a detective in the UK for decades, and he has essentially assisted me throughout the last decade on this particular case.
This is the cigarette packet that they're talking about on the back patio table. And this is the time, 6:31 p.m, Friday the 14th. So that's when the photograph was taken. Can you see the video down here? The 13th, this is the Thursday video, police video. This is the table in question at the back here. Where's that cigarette packet? It's not there.
Discovering that that cigarette packet was not there in the first instance was a significant turning point. It was a crucial piece of evidence in the state's case, and for the integrity of that item to be questionable was quite significant in my mind. And what flowed from that was the questionable issues about the knife and the Jim Beam can.
We have gone right through this area of the road where that can should be. We can't see it there at the moment, but look at the time, 7:33 in the morning on the 10th. The pictures that were shown in court, right, were taken 24 hours later. So, that's what Clint and I have come up with, and He shouldn't be there, Robbie.
I know.
The next piece of evidence that there's another miraculous finding is a knife.
So once we'd gone through the timeline of what had happened down in Boddington in terms of the investigation, we realised that the paddock area between Stacey and Scott's house was searched by police and SES personnel on Tuesday the 11th of December 2007. They conducted a thorough line search, and there was somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 12 people involved in that line search. Now that paddock was a gravelly paddock, didn't contain heavy vegetation, and it was quite an easy search area. They didn't find a knife. The following day, detectives walk out into that paddock, and within a couple of minutes, they find a blood-stained knife in essentially plain view. It wasn't concealed by anything, it was quite easy to see.
Now, from these photos, Clint, this has to be where the knife was found.
Robin Napper and I decided to go down to Boddington to have a look at the scene. It's got to come in there. So I reckon the knife, well, that photo is taken from about here, so the knife would have been somewhere right about here.
The police case was that the knife was found by 3 detectives who were casually going through a paddock which had been searched the previous day.
But between the murder house and where the knife was found, there's nothing. How the hell do you miss that if you're doing a line search? We're just going to have to speak to the SES guy. How many of you could actually say, look, we searched there Tuesday and we simply did not see that knife?
How many was in your team?
We got 6. I was pushing through.
There's 11 all up. So.
We were told that the knife was found down here.
Down a bit more towards the
general
area of the back of Scott's house. It was all basically bare ground there, wasn't it? Like there was no grass as such or anything.
That's the thing that always struck me. We're trained to search these areas. I led a team through there.
Right.
And then we find out the next day that they found a knife exactly where we searched, so we failed. And, you know, and that's when we said to ourselves, bullshit.
We would not have missed that.
Must have arrived after the event.
So we engaged Dr. Richard Shepherd, an eminent forensic pathologist in the UK. He has done in excess of 20,000 autopsies. He's worked on cases such as the 9/11 terrorist attack in New York, and he was also involved in the review of the Princess Diana death.
The knife had been found, and it was a lock knife, so a knife that would fold shut, but when it was opened out, the blade was 10 centimetres long and it had a single cutting edge.
The 4 fatal wounds, the length of the wound tracks were longer than 10 centimetres. They were up to 15 centimetres in length.
The knife that has a blade of 10 centimetres long really shouldn't be causing injuries that are 15 centimetres deep. It's well established forensically that knives can cause injuries that are actually slightly deeper than the length of the blade, because when a knife hits the body, the force of that contact can actually make it go deeper into the human body than the length of the blade. But it's seldom more than a centimetre or two, 10%. So a 10 centimetre blade, well, I would expect to go in maximum of 11, possibly, very rarely, 12 centimetres.
Dr. Shepherd's evidence was a bombshell. The murder weapon almost definitely couldn't have been the murder weapon.
It seems to me that the arrival of this incredibly powerful finding of a knife with the deceased's blood on it shows that it wasn't just a little sequence that was put together. Someone had thought about this. Someone had obtained the blood. Someone had put it on the blade. This was a deliberate attempt to try and skew the evidence. But of course it was flawed, because they didn't know that the knife had to be 15 centimetres long in order to achieve what they were trying to do.
This knife did not contain any of Scott's DNA or fingerprints, and you might expect that someone who's firmly gripping a knife to stab someone 21 times would transfer their DNA or fingerprints to that particular item.
In 40 years, I've seen many things, but I've never, ever seen such a blatant attempt to plant incriminating evidence in a case. I've seen evidence lost, I've seen evidence mislaid, I've seen evidence misinterpreted, but never such a blatant attempt to try and pervert the course of justice.
When I agreed to look at this case, I had no idea that it would take 10 years.
All this has been missed. All this has been there. You? This was, I guess, worse.
We keep on hearing it. He wants to appeal, wants to appeal. It's just horrible.
Now a new appeal is examining claims police planted evidence against him.
Evidence tampering destroys everyone's faith in the justice system.
A man who claimed he was framed for a murder 13 years ago has been found not guilty of the crime.
I could feel tears running down my face, just waiting for those two words. We got the biggest shock of our lives when they said, not guilty.
I've always believed in the police, but I never ever trust them again. Ever.
There's no justice at the moment. The police should investigate those other suspects.
This other person was known to Stacey. There had been some history of altercations in the past.
We want them to reopen the case and do their job, find out who did it.